Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Metter again. We're continuing on in our population ecology notes. And so what we're going to look at now are what we call reproductive strategies. And this does not mean is this sexual or asexual. It just means basically how many births each organism has and the amount of parental care that is given to those organisms. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is right here we have a fly and we have a gorilla. Now obviously the way these two reproduce is going to be extremely different from one another. So those differences are what we're going to look at. So let's start with the fly. This is what we refer to as an R-selected organism. When I think of R-selected organisms, I like to equate that to rapid. So how many offspring does a fly have at one time? A lot, right? So R-selected organisms are small. Flies are obviously small, and they have many offspring. Now, why do we think they have many offspring? Well, most of the offspring don't actually survive. They either get eaten by something else, they get stepped on, etc. So they have lots of offspring at one time. Now, another interesting characteristic of these R-selected organisms is they do not care for their young. Okay, so the fly mamas do not take care of the fly babies. So there is minimal parental care. All right, minimal parental care and lots of babies. Basically, they also die young. The average lifespan for a housefly is about 48 hours, so they don't live to be very old at all. So they die young, which means they have to mature rapidly. Okay? And we know that competition between these organisms is going to be low. So competition is low. All right, so we have a fly as an example. So what are other examples of R-selected species? Well, mosquitoes, those lovely little organisms that come out when it's warm. It doesn't have to be an animal, so we could say dandelions. You could say roaches. They're really gross, but that would also be an example. Okay, so when we look at another reproductive strategy, we can compare it to a large animal. So obviously a gorilla isn't going to fall under any of these descriptors. Gorillas are large, they have extensive care, they live to be long, and the competition between them is high. Okay, so we refer to these organisms as K-selected. Now, y'all, I know we literally just went over carrying capacity, and that also stands for K, but I don't know why they picked K for this too. So carrying capacity, K, is not the same thing as K-selected, okay? So these organisms are large, and they have few offspring. So you can probably already think of tons of examples in your head, okay? They have extensive parental care. So obviously the mothers in these situations are going to provide very long care for their young. Okay. So they live long lives. You know, gorillas can basically live as long as we do. Okay. And we know that competition is high between these organisms. So they're competing for things like food, space, mates. All right, so examples, gorilla, we can put whales, humans. What do you guys think? Pandas. I love pandas. Aren't they cute? There's lots of examples. Okay. Now, both of these types of organisms are controlled by what is called the biotic potential. All right, so both are controlled by the biotic potential. All right, so the biotic potential refers to the maximum amount of offspring they can have in ideal conditions. That means that there are unlimited resources. In reality, we know that's simply not true, but we can look at what their potential could be. Okay, so the biotic potential is the, where's my little marker? Oh no, where'd it go? 1 second, guys. There we go. Is the maximum reproductive rates. Okay? And again, I'm going to put in parentheses, this is ideal, not reality. Okay? All right. Now, when we look at R versus K selected species, their survivorship curves are also going to be different. So when we're graphing the age at which an organism dies, it creates a survivorship curve. So we're going to label this. This is a survivorship curve. All right. And so what is a survivorship curve? It displays survival rates. Okay. So it displays survival rates of a group of individuals of the same age in a population. All right, so basically what this does, let's say they counted 1,000 blue whales, okay? And they put a dot to create this graph at the age at which each one of those 1,000 whales died. So here's our age. So our age is obviously going to be increasing this direction. Okay, the survival rate is increasing. Okay, so what this shows us is a blue whale has a really long life. Okay, but the older they get, there's a sharp decline in the survival rate. So you could put humans here as well. Okay, they have a pretty extensive long life, so they live to be pretty old. And then there's a sharp drop off when they reach that advanced age. Okay, so that is what we call type 1 species. So type 1 species would be our K-selected organisms. All right, these are the ones that have very few offspring. They live to be older. They have extensive parental care. All right, now I'm going to skip down here to type 3. Type 3, it shows us that there are lots of these individuals that are young, okay, but there's a very steep drop off in the survival rate. So they, reach a very limited age before they just start dying in massive quantities. So like dandelions, like flies, like mosquitoes. So this is going to be our R selected. Okay. Now, type 2, they're just kind of interesting. Type 2, like a squirrel, their survival, actually I should say their probability of death is unrelated to their age, which means a squirrel could be, 2 months old or 5 years old. It has the same chance of dying because of what's happening in the environment. So, it gets hit by a car, it gets shot by a hunter, whatever the case may be. So type 2 individuals, their probability of death is unrelated to their age. Probability of death is unrelated to their age. So another example of this, of a type 2, would be a bird, mice, things like that. Smaller mammals. I know a bird's not a mammal, but it's a smaller organism. Okay? So, hopefully you guys understand the differences between these. We're going to have some practice in looking at these graphs and identifying R and K selected species. And then we're going to move on into the unit.